And we are live. Hey, what's up, guys? This is Ruben from Dubb's podcast, Connection Loop. Today I have Michael Anaya with me, and we're going to get into a really, really serious topic, cybercrime. So I don't know how many of you guys have kind of dealt with cybercrime or a threat or reading about it, having people talk about it. It's a real topic. You know, there are bad actors out there, and we need to learn how to protect ourselves. So without further ado, I want to get right into this. Michael, if you could just kind of give me a little bit of backstory on yourself, how you got into cybercrime, what your sort of general purpose is. Love to learn about that.
Well, first of all, thanks for inviting me on the show. I really appreciate it. I love just chatting with people who want to know more. So this is a perfect opportunity for me to do that. So I'll give you a background. I started in technology in college. My first job was banking software development, which I always tell people was really enjoyable and rewarding. It was not. It was boring. So during that time, I'm like, going to something different. And so I applied to join the FBI. I was accepted. So I joined the FBI. They put me on a cyber squad as a special agent with the FBI cyber squad. I was originally stationed in Los Angeles, California. I was there for about 8 years, where I did just data breach intrusions, um, account takeovers, anything dealing with internet fraud, anything dealing with a computer. But principally, I really honed in on data breaches. That's kind of my specialty. And then I transitioned to headquarters with the FBI in Washington, D.C. I did the leadership development program there. I was a supervisor there for about 2 years. And then I promoted again. I came to Atlanta, Georgia, and I was running point on a cyber squad here for about 4 years before I decided to join a startup out here in Atlanta named DevCon. And that's where I'm currently at. DevCon basically is a cybersecurity company that specializes in protecting all forms of JavaScript that operate on a web page. And one of my main things I like doing is talking to people and helping educate individuals on cybercrime.
This is a hell of a topic. I mean, you came from the FBI. You were in it. You were fighting cybercrime. I mean, that's right out of a TV show. You know, I mean, that position has become so sensationalized.
It's
You
true.
know, Mr. Robot, and so many others. Black Mirror. I mean, this idea of these ominous, lurking bad actors that live within the recesses and the abyss of the internet, the dark web, the dark net, and that come forward with really terrible, malicious intentions, and that go after innocent people and innocent companies. Well, most innocent, I presume. That's a real form of crime right now. What are some of the things that you dealt with? What did you see being in that game?
So, you a lot. You brought up so many different things. So, like when I left the FBI, when I was supervising a cyber squad in Atlanta, we dealt with multiple threats. So, from nation state, those are individuals who are operating at the behest of another country. So, I worked Chinese and Iranian threats, and then all the way to criminal. One of the criminal groups was sort of what you're describing. They were targeting various individuals who are susceptible, and they were putting a lot of pressure on them, causing them to feel a tremendous amount of anxiety and stress that they were to compel them to give them money. I can't really discuss too much because the case is ongoing, but it was really horrific. The FBI took those type of crimes extremely seriously. We put together a group of individuals in the Atlanta office. We blended efforts with other offices, including headquarters, and we really mounted a serious investigation into that group. But then, when I was in LA, cases I did work that I can talk about, I identified the first known peer-to-peer botnet operator. A botnet is a robotic network, and these are tool can be used through multiple means, but basically he controlled thousands upon thousands of computers, that he was basically grabbing all key pieces of information, or what's typically termed PII, or personally identifiable information. So he grabbed that data, used it to his advantage. He obfuscated everything he did by using encryption. So it's very difficult to identify him, but we were able to find him. To other individuals who were going after gaming sites, I went after another guy who was bold and brazen. This was back when internet kiosks were popular. What he did is he worked at a company that they were facilitating development and usage of the kiosk. He went to one of their locations and just took it over. He took a thumb drive, circumvented their security protocols, loaded his own front end interface. So when someone went there, all the money was directed to himself. It was just crazy.
So how much money can that be if it's just one kiosk, or was it all of the kiosks?
He did a multiple kiosks. So he was doing a fair amount of money. I don't remember specifics, but what caught me, he was so brazen about it. Like, he did try to hide his activity. Like, he took other people's identities and connected them to the payment accounts. So that his money as you would go to the kiosk, you enter your credit information, it went to a payment processor. That payment processor processes those payments. And when it went to him, it went to a fake name with a fake account. The name was actually real because he took someone's identity. So it's identity theft. But then the account was something he controlled. So he tried to hide what he was doing. We did an undercover operation where I went in there with a hidden camera and another agent. And we went with the payment processor. They did an on-site survey, which is very common if you own your own business and you have a front-end operation. The payment processor can go out there and just make sure it's legitimate. So we talked to the payment processor. They agreed to come along with us. So we went there with them. I was the agent. I wore a button cam and we recorded that. He thought, from his perspective, I simply was just some random guy from the payment processor who was just doing a site survey. And so one of the things I was able to cultivate, and we can talk about a little bit later, was the ability to really connect with people, especially criminals, and really get them to sort of tell me what they did and why they did it. But in this instance, I was just developing rapport with him, talking with him, chatting with him. And during the course of my conversation, I switched the topic to hacking. And it was seamless. Like, he had no idea, right? He just thought I was just some guy who's with the bank. And so I'm like playing into his ego, telling him, hey, it seems like you do some security stuff that's really interesting. Have you ever done any hacking? And he was just like, oh yeah, I do. And he was like describing how he would hack. And so I'm like, well, how would you compromise like a computer? Like, what would you do? And he's there explaining specifically what he did in this instance to take over the kiosk. Now, he didn't describe that, but he's speaking in hypothetical terms. But ultimately, he's confessing everything. And so that was awesome to get that type of information from him. But anyway, so
can this be recorded in a context like that?
In terms of, what do you mean? Like, can
the audio be recorded, and then is it admissible in a court of law?
Yes. So like everything that I was doing. So there's one of the things you'll ever see when you watch movies or TV shows. There's a tremendous amount of paperwork that goes behind the scenes, and a lot of approval process in order to get anything done. So like example, I can't just simply decide, you know what, as a random agent, I'm going to go record this conversation, I'm going to do this following things without approval. So there's tremendous amount of oversight within the FBI. So all that had to basically be acquired. And then when you acquire the evidence, you have to develop what's called a chain of custody. Your purpose is to establish that no one actually tainted the evidence or came in and modified it at all. So it's very heavily regulated.
Got it. And then where did that case land?
So that particular case, we then executed a search warrant at his home residence. Then he saw me. He was obviously surprised because he thought I was representing the payment processor. Did an interrogation, asked him some questions. He asked for an attorney relatively quickly. So we didn't really need a confession from him because he already gave it to us in the recording. But we charged him. He served, I think, about 3 years, and then he was extradited. So he was actually here illegally from another country. So he was then extradited, handed over to ICE, so Immigration, Customs, and Enforcement, and then they basically sent him back to his home country. And the funny thing about that is he reached out to one of the victim companies back when he was sent to his home country and applied for employment. And they messaged me. They're like, hey, is this the guy that you arrested like 4 years ago? And I'm like, yeah, that's him. And they're like, well, he's looking for a job. It's like,
that's
right,
amazing.
well, that's crazy.
But I mean, isn't it like that in the movies where, and also real life? But because I think Mitnick is now highly employed.
Mhm.
But my understanding is that sometimes I guess this idea of an ethical hacker puts themselves out there. They do not do malicious things per se, but then because of their ability to hack and really prove, maybe through a bounty or maybe not, that they actually prove how good of a computer scientist, on how good of a hacker they are, and then as a result they get employed. So what is your take on that, that angle? Because I've gotten those emails before,
Mhm.
where it says, we will find this, and if we do, we give us a bounty. And I've gotten those, and I don't respond to them. That's just not what I do. But just curious, what is your take on that?
That's very interesting. Individuals who utilize those techniques are really, I, I just fall in a fine line. If they do it well and they present you prior to doing anything, like they present their value proposition up front, meaning they basically get consent. They're basically asking you that, hey, if we can find a vulnerability in your system, would you pay us money?
Hmm.
That's very different. Some individuals go beyond that. And a lot of criminals operate in this capacity, and they'll hide behind that idea of a bounty or a white hat. It's either ethical hacker or white hat hacker. But basically, they'll commit a crime. So they'll basically identify vulnerability, utilize that vulnerability, then present you with that information and sort of feign that they're doing it at, hey, I found this vulnerability. I was able to acquire this information. I don't want to share it with anyone. I'll just share it with you. But here's what I'm going to charge you. If anyone, any of your listeners have experienced that, that is a crime. They
Yes.
came into a protected network. And that's one of the key elements of the statute that basically enforces this law is being created or has been created, is enforced by a protected computer. It needs to be protected, meaning you can't just have an open server, an open computer that anyone can access. That is not a protected computer. But if you have a computer where you have a password or some sort of credential information, and you do not intend for others to go there, in this instance, if that were to occur, and the person so goes there and presents you with this information and then asks payment, that's a categorical crime. And you definitely should not pay them. You should report that to law enforcement so they can help apprehend that individual. But if they do that, that's that gray line. And in my mind, it's clear that they've crossed it. But it just depends on how they approach it. If they approach it in the proper way, where they first ask you for permission, key thing is permission. And then if you then allow that to happen, then that's different.
Got it.
That kind of makes sense.
It does. You mentioned that the individual that you mentioned, he was very brazen. I mean, you mentioned that a couple of times about his feat, his accomplishment, his hack. Okay, he was proud of it, and maybe he wanted attention, or maybe he wanted to be famous for 15 minutes. Now, when I think of hackers, bad actors, I don't think necessarily of people that want to be in the limelight. I think of people that want to have the uh, medal of honor, knowing that they accomplished something and that they did something. But mostly they're just a stereotype for just a moment, highly introverted, and not necessarily in getting that fame. The fortune, yes, but the fame, not so much. What have you noticed in your experience in terms of why people do what they do?
So it depends, but a lot of times fame is different than fame that you and I might be more familiar with. In other words, in the hacking community, a lot of times fame is associated with a moniker or their username. It's typically termed moniker. So, like, if you and I had a moniker, we're hackers, there's a certain notoriety built on that name. Now, our true identities are protected because if we're going to truly utilize tools and techniques and procedures, TTPs, that are illegal and illicit, we don't want to be arrested. If you're a hacker and you get arrested or identified, that's a bad day for you because you go to jail. So we really can't gain notoriety by having a LinkedIn profile where we're highlighting our skill set. But if we're utilizing a moniker that we take pride in, and then people know us in the community. So hypothetically, we'll say my moniker is super good looking dude. So if super good looking dude has really developed tradecraft and really sophisticated techniques, then I get that fame and notoriety, but everyone just knows that moniker.
Got
So
it.
then people in the industry know the moniker. And then I feel protected because if I'm good at my craft, I can hide behind various different techniques that protect me and make it very, very difficult for people to identify me. But I still gain that notoriety because in that community, everyone knows me as my moniker.
Got it. Hashtag V for Vendetta.
Right.
There it's so many times in media and really in history, there is that icon, that brand that's associated with anarchy, with breaking rules, with pushing limits, and V for Vendetta is obviously one of those great icons. You see a lot of hackers use that. I don't know if you're a fan of the film. I don't know if you've even seen it, but why did that film resonate? Or this kind of idea of this anonymous, intelligent, compassionate human, but highly powerful and anarchistic, really, personality. What's your take on that?
That's interesting. I mean, I think a lot of times Hollywood does a great job of glorifying everything, right? You're looking at criminality. A lot of films that we like watching are taken from the vantage point of the criminal many times that they uh, grandize that life. Same law enforcement. Look at a lot of movies where the centric character is a FBI agent, and they glorify that role. The same is true of hackers. V for Vendetta, I actually did say it. I really did enjoy that movie. I think sometimes hackers, many times, it just depends on the actual hacker. They're so different. It's hard to really, I don't want to lump them into one group. Some of them are actually going out there and they really do feel that what they're trying to accomplish is something bigger than the act themselves. The majority aren't. Majority of hackers that you and I might cross in terms of just on online, like if someone were to go after you or someone go after me, they're not really trying to do right by society. They're trying to make money.
Mm.
You look at a nation state actor, it's a very different mindset. It's their job. Like they go in and out of work with the focus of, I'm representing this government, and my job is to exfil data or inject something in a network so I can listen and monitor surreptitiously without being noticed. So it just really comes back to that mindset of the person. I can chat about this a little bit, but I basically start recognizing there's some observations I've made since I've done various interrogations and interviews with many hackers, and people just committed crimes. I started seeing I've made some observations that a lot of times people fall in these camps. So like oh, go ahead.
Yeah, after you.
Oh, so one of the things I basically observed in a lot of these interrogations is this concept of justification. We as people can justify almost any action. One of the analogies I like talking about is speeding. I think we've all sped. Like everyone who's listening to this podcast or watching this video has committed that crime. And speeding is a crime. But we justify our actions by basically asserting, well, no one was on the road, right? I was by myself, or I was running late, or everyone was going 75, or the speed limit was 70. I was going 75. It's not that big of a deal. We'll justify however we want, but justification is key. Hackers and criminals do the exact same thing. They all justify their actions. Very human, very common. The next component I witnessed is this idea of prolonged exposure to criminality. If you think, Ruben, you don't have to answer, but if you've ever done anything wrong and you did it the first time, there's a high probability you felt guilt and you're like, oh my God, I can't believe I did that, whatever it may be. But the time you do it the second time, you feel less guilt. 20 times later, less guilt. By the 100th time, you probably don't have much guilt. It becomes a way of life. Okay. That prolonged exposure to that mindset, that attitude, we've all experienced it to some degree. Hackers, criminals, they do the same. In order to remedy that is my third observation, which is corrective action. So in order or lack thereof, if there is a lack of corrective action, then that prolonged exposure just continues. So corrective action in the example I gave of speeding is a speeding ticket. Imagine when you were first learning how to drive, you were speeding, you probably were nervous and like, oh my God, I'm doing this. But we'll say the 10th time you sped, all of a sudden you got pulled over by the cop. Cop gives you a ticket, you then take that citation, you give it to your parents, they're upset, they ground you. That corrective action helps minimize that behavior and discourages it from you from doing it in the future. But if that corrective action never occurred and you were to speed, you would speed probably your entire life and never really care about it. And at some point, it becomes normal. The fourth observation I made with criminals is that they all fall into this world where there's an environment that helps promote that lifestyle. There were times I interacted with various members of various violent gangs, and it's a different way of life for them than it is for us. And that environment is one where it's celebrated to go to prison, believe it or not. It's expected you're going to go to prison. You and I are not expecting one of us to go to prison. If we were to go to prison, that would be really difficult for us to sort of contemplate and just even fathom. In a criminal world, that's not the case. So that environment is such a huge component. And taking it out of, the gang example, going back to speeding, if you and I constantly joked about speeding and if our friends were joking and we're all just kind of like saying, how fast could you go? That would encourage us to continue to speed. So those are the four observations I've made that all criminals that I've arrested or charged all kind of exhibited some level of. The key underlying component of all that is really context. I think many times we as people are so quick to judge and say, oh my God, I would never do that. I would never, ever, ever do that. But if you're given the right context, you might. And the analogy I give here is something I frame the red light paradox.
Okay.
So I'd ask you, Ruben, would you run a red light? What would your response be?
It depends.
It does. Would you run a red light at 3 p.m.?
It depends.
Would you find it easier to run a red light at 4 or 3 a.m.?
Yes.
And that's where they come. So if you were to say, hey, I ran a red light, instantly someone's like, that's irresponsible. Like my initial reaction, just even saying that, I'm like, Ruben, why would you do that? But if you then put some context around it, well, Michael, it was 3 a.m. Okay, I'm a little more understanding of that.
Right.
Still, though, breaking the law. Like, well, Michael, no one was around. In addition, my significant other was injured and I was taken to the hospital.
Right.
All of a sudden, that judgment I had goes away.
Right.
And I'm like, okay, well, you did the right thing.
Right. And that's the definition of ends justifying the means.
Exactly. And that justification, many times in everybody I've arrested, they all have it. They all have that context. And we as people, many times, we don't have that experience when you deal with criminals. You read a headline. It's simply just your first judgment, your first opinion. But when you actually talk to people, you all of a sudden realize there's a lot of context to their decision. And it's not that black and white. And many times it is difficult to simply say what they did was just outright wrong.
Right. Interesting. I mean, that takes a lot of exposure and a lot of experience to be able to break that down the way that you did. I really appreciate that. What makes someone become a hacker, a malicious hacker? I mean, Facebook used to host hackathons. They still do. They used to promote the idea of hacking. Their slogan, the Facebook slogan was, break things or break things. I forgot what it was, but it was basically promoting a culture around breaking and fixing things. And they realized from a branding perspective that it wasn't really good. They've moved away from that entirely. They don't have that type of branding or kind of rhetoric that they use at all anymore. Because of the sort of negative connotations with hackers. But so I do want to clarify so that some people, they call themselves hackers. I've heard growth hackers. I've heard cyber hackers. I've heard ethical hackers. I've heard a lot of those types of terminology. So I don't want to use the word a hacker in a negative way because not all hackers are evil. But my question is, those that are evil, those that are malicious, those that are running the red light, so to speak, at all hours of the day, risking people's lives just for some benefit, either financial or fame or both. What makes a person do that and get into that? What have you noticed? What have you learned?
Many times it starts young. And going back to some of those observations, you're looking at environment. A lot of hackers start in the gaming community. No one polices the gaming community outside of the people who run the consoles, or if you're playing on Xbox or if you're playing on PlayStation, the only people who are going to potentially identify what you're doing are other gamers and or the actual organizations themselves, but no one's going to really refer that to law enforcement. So a lot of times these gamers will basically take one another offline to go after a game server, bring it down, and it's accepted. It's fun for them. They don't think it is doing anything wrong because again, that environment has cultivated that mindset. As you start going from there without the corrective action I mentioned earlier and the prolonged exposure, you start then finding other applications and it becomes kind of normal. It's just kind of, it's not a big deal. Who cares? And you continue that trajectory. It just depends on what your environment is consisted of. If you have a lot of opportunities for, going to a collegiate environment, and then you're looking at, wanting to go into law enforcement, or you're aspiring to get a PhD, that environment is going to then shift you and move in other directions. If you don't have positive influence, then all of a sudden you have this ability, your attitude's kind of, passe when it comes to that criminal component. You don't see it as wrong. You just see it as just kind of what everyone does. And now all of a sudden you enter a more devious act. You go after your ex-girlfriend. You go after someone who wronged you.
These are personal vendettas. Yeah,
exactly. And now all of a sudden you take it up a level. You potentially find some financial gain to be able to do these things. Then you then go to the next level. Why stop at one person? You can go after many people. Again, without corrective action and with that prolonged exposure, you continue to operate. Then you learn how to protect yourself. You figure out, okay, I got to anonymize what I'm doing. And you probably already started doing this. No one's going to catch me. If no one's going to catch you, it's a challenge. It becomes very addictive. This lifestyle.
Those are such famous last words.
Right. It's true.
Catch me if you can.
But that lifestyle all of a sudden takes over, and you're now in a very different place than you were maybe when you're much younger. It is complex. It's contextual, and not everyone follows that same path.
Yeah.
Some of those hackers I identified, I asked them about the upbringing and kind of their youth and whatnot. And a lot of times, what I just described plays a role. It kind of explains where they go. It's super complex. It's never that. There's never a path. There's never like a linear path. Here's what you do in order to get to this level. They all follow different paths. The other component too is where you're located. A lot of criminal hackers are in like former Eastern Soviet bloc countries.
And why is that? And why is that?
A lot of times because opportunity isn't as abundant as it is in the US or like Australia or the UK or Europe. So they have advanced technical training, but they just don't have people to hire them. Well, because of that, they look for other ways to make money. Another hotbed for criminal activity is going to be different parts of Africa. So Nigeria or Ghana. These are other areas where you're going to see individuals who, a lot of the schemes, the fraud schemes that a lot of people are falling prey to, the individual actors are from these countries. At the end is that environment, lack of corrective action. Many times, like in Nigeria, crime is so rampant. The Nigerian government's focus on bigger issues, trying to stabilize the whole country.
Right.
When they have people that have reported to facilitate some crime, taking thousands of dollars from some Americans, to be honest with you, it's low on their priority list. They're trying to keep their government together.
And you're talking about the prince, right?
Right, then like a Nigerian prince, right? That's the most people have thought of. But there's a lot of schemes, and you and I can chat with them a little bit, but not to get too granular. There are a lot of fraud schemes that the actors are from Nigeria, and the people you're emailing, a lot of romance schemes. A lot of people fall prey, especially the elderly that are lonely, that are looking for a connection. They'll fall prey to this. They're talking to someone. That person they think is, somebody in the US. They're not. The person has taken a photo of a real life individual, used it as their profile. They're communicating in actuality with somebody in Nigeria or another country. Right. And it's interesting because Nigerians think differently than we do about some of those fraud schemes. When we interviewed and interrogated them, they feel like they're just tricking us. I'm using air quotes for people who aren't watching the video. They don't see it as really that egregious. And matter of fact, they sort of see it as our fault. Like we should be smart enough to not fall prey to this. I'm just tricking you. You should know better. Very different mindset than we as Americans potentially see it. So culture comes into play. So
right.
Multifaceted.
Right, exactly. And so, I mean, now that we've kind of laid out some of the realities of the industry and the kind of why and the what. Let's talk a little bit about the how, because what I'm trying to understand is how can we be safer as individuals, as social personas, as representatives of companies, and as companies. How can we be more safe on the internet?
So, do you want to start with the corporate perspective or individuals?
Let's start from the individual and let's end up on corporate. Just the me, my neighbor, my friends, family.
So, for individuals, there's a few things that I think just general elements you need to do, and you might have heard a lot of this before. You definitely need to have antivirus protection. Antivirus protection helps really secure you and others that are utilizing any type of hardware, like a computer, a phone, or whatever it may be. Even many times people have this thought of, oh, I'm using a Macintosh, it's safer. You still need antivirus in play. That antiviral protection is going to protect you, but also your family members. So, like Ruben, you and I are pretty sophisticated. We probably won't fall prey to some sort of scheme, a phishing scheme, where someone sends an email and we click on it. But if we have children, they might. They don't quite understand things the way we understand them, so they might fall prey to that. And all of a sudden, if they're using a family computer, now all of a sudden that family computer is infected. Malware or malicious software isn't what it used to be back in the day, where all of a sudden everything runs slow and you get some sort of skull and crossbones. If you haven't been infected with malicious software, there's a probability you have, you just don't know it.
Right.
It's invisible. It's hard to find. The objective of the people who write malicious software isn't to wreak havoc.
Right.
It's really to lay dormant and capture that key piece of information so then they can utilize the credential information, login details. Those are the things they want. They don't want you to know what they're doing. They want to operate under the radar. So
Right.
antivirus protection, education. There's a lot of online education. The U.S. government offers a lot of training to help educate you and your family. So AV, education. The other component you're going to want to basically do is, I'm trying to think how to put this. You want to basically put some data segmentation in play. This is easier to do in a corporate setting, but if you have a home Wi-Fi, you want to make sure that that is locked down, but you also potentially want to segment the devices you have in your home. So if you're going to have your laptop and your family and all the hardware on one access node or wireless access device, that's good. And then maybe your smart home features on another.
Oh, interesting. And why is that?
What that helps do is it helps create that data segmentation. So if you deal with a vulnerability, not everything's open to the actor.
Oh, I got it.
Information is segmented.
So it's a way to kind of compartmentalize that.
It does. And this is very common in a corporate setting. If anyone's listening is a network administrator, that's very common in their world. For people at home, they normally don't do this. There's actually routers out there that allow you to sort of create two wireless access points.
Yeah.
And so you can have one SSID that basically has you at one, and then another one could be for your smart devices. If you really want to become a little bit more advanced.
Right. And then maybe even another one for guests.
Yeah.
People that come to your house.
Yeah. I mean, what you could do is like, well, you can do a lot of things. I don't want to get too granular. Otherwise, I'll be here all day telling you different techniques. But one of the things I want to share with you before I forget, a lot of internet service providers want to help prevent the distribution of malicious software. So they will actually give you free antiviral protection.
Oh.
So if, like, example, AT&T, they used to advertise this a little bit more, and now you got to like dig around on the website to find it. But basically, you have free licenses up to, I think it's 5 with AT&T. Check whoever you use as your internet service provider or ISP. Even just call them 1-800 number, be like, hey, you guys offer free antiviral protection.
Oh, interesting.
If they say yes, well, then take advantage of it. Download that, and then ensure that all those devices are protected. That was one of the things I wanted to mention before I forgot. But those are the 3 things you can do. So antiviral protection, data segmentation, and just help in training and education.
Nice, man. So where can we find some of the stuff that you're working on? Web address, social channels. Curious to learn more.
So for me, if you want to get a hold of me, the best way to get a hold of me is LinkedIn.
Okay.
I'm most present on LinkedIn, also Twitter. You can
Okay.
find me there as well, but I'm not that active on Twitter. But LinkedIn is principally where you're going to find me.
That, you know what? That's where I found you. So you're obviously doing something correct. I saw that we have a lot of mutual connections, you and I. But I think really how we came together was through content and just seeing some of the material that you had posted. I know that you function as a keynote speaker, and you've spoken about cybersecurity for a number of organizations. And that hey, listen, we really appreciate the service that you're doing, because we all need to be educated. We need more evangelists so that we can take this stuff seriously. Password 1234 is not a good password. If that's your password, or your dog's name, or the name of your street, or your kid's name, or spouse or girlfriend or boyfriend, 12 or 1234, or your birthday, or some extremely obvious combination, you're going to want to change that.
No, exactly. I actually put a PDF out there on LinkedIn. If you happen to connect with me, you can actually download it for free.
Okay.
It basically talks about password. It basically
Nice.
talks about like how to create how to create a correct password, some of the special character requirements you should put in play. It talks about this concept of password managers, as opposed to just trying to memorize all your passwords or using the same
Yes.
password for
Yes.
all your accounts. So there's definitely things I put out on LinkedIn that are free to use. One of the things I'm actually finalizing now is a document for people who work from home.
Okay.
Different tips and tricks that they can do to protect their home or work environment. So companies could then obviously take advantage of it, download it, look at it, and potentially disseminate that to the employees who work remotely. Because there's just different tips and tricks that I've cultivated that, again, help people stay safe. And that's the objective, right? Is to basically keep you safe online, enjoy the internet, but use it safely and use it wisely.
Nice. That's a really valuable asset. Yeah, I think anyone that's listening, consider going and finding Michael Anaya on LinkedIn, and then there is that asset. So that's in like your post section, or where is that?
Yeah, if you look at my post, I'll probably post it. I'll probably put it where it's more consistent, and you can find
Okay.
it like on my homepage on LinkedIn. But right now, it's just one of my posts. Just a recent post. Like if you go back like 5 posts, you'll find it.
Okay, cool. That's really good to know. Yeah, I think another thing I wish more people did was set up 2FA, two-factor authorization, or MFA, multi-factor, and that just means, it's going to send you a text message. It's going to send you a notification. There's a 6-digit code. You enter that on the website, so that if someone doesn't have your mobile device, 2 devices essentially, they're not going to be able to get in. So, good passwords, 2FA. What else?
Coming from a individual user, those are some of the big ones. Corporations are a little different. Some of the things I put together, I've recently put together an article for corporations to kind of give them some guidance. I'm actually going to be doing a presentation next week here in Atlanta. I'm going to talk more specifically about some of the big 3 crimes that I've arrested people and I've investigated when I was with the FBI. But ultimately, in that presentation, I want to give you some real specific things you can do if you're a company. But overarching, like 5 components I put together that companies should do. So number 1, you want to build a team. Even if you're a small organization, that team could be you as a CEO, someone who you have that you feel is a technical component, and then a contractor. And you don't have to meet that frequently, but just talk about cybersecurity. Figure out, hey, the tech we're doing, what do we need to do? Ask the questions, figure that out, but build the team. The second thing you do is you empower that team. If you're looking at a large organization, we'll say over 250 people, you need to have a highly functional team, but you got to give them the power to do what they need to do to protect the organizations. It's happened far too many times where when I responded to a situation, something was misconfigured. I've spoken to various individuals and they advised me, they made recommendations, but because of budgetary restraints, they weren't able to put the proper protocols in play. Now that company's basically paying out thousands upon thousands of dollars, not millions of dollars, in order to mitigate what happened. And now all that data is lost, and they have PR elements associated with it. So you definitely empower that team. There will definitely be things that are going to be cost prohibitive, but let that team give those recommendations and really consider them strongly. The third thing is going to be layer security. So one of the things that I always encourage companies or individuals to do is not just put one line of security. And most people who are focused on security know this. You want to put multiple layers in place. So like
Yes.
if you think about like your home usage, if you have a home, you're going to protect it. You're going to lock the front door, so there's a lock. That's one layer.
Right.
Then you're also going to have a home camera, maybe like a Nest or something else that monitors it. You might pay for security service. You're going to then educate your family. You're going to do multiple layers. Corporations need to do the same. You need to basically have the team empowered, but that team is going to recommend, hey, we need to basically have data segmentation. We need to have, we need to have a SIEM, which is a system that monitors all logs. We need to basically help control organizational gap. Organizational gap is when you have multiple org units and some are running like one, believe it or not, you have companies out there where you have marketing running a website and security is not aware of what marketing is doing.
Right.
There's a gap.
Right.
And that's where a lot of times you have that vulnerability. But that's where securities come in and create a layered approach to help secure all the intellectual property and ensure that there is not a vulnerability that's open. The fourth thing is just create awareness. Create awareness is just educate your workforce. People say the greatest vulnerability, and I can attest to this, is people. When I chatted with a bunch of CISOs recently, CISO stands for Chief Information Security Officer. These are the people who are empowered in a corporate setting that run their security programs. It's a executive position, very difficult to get. But I've spoken to many of these individuals and I ask them, what is your biggest pain point? And the common answer is always the same. It's people. It's their workforce not intentionally infecting the network, but unintentionally doing it. Getting an email and clicking on it when they know they shouldn't have, or maybe they weren't trained accordingly. That's how most threat actors are going to get into your network, by tricking or social engineering their way in.
Right. Social
So,
engineering.
so
That's a
creating
term that a lot of people don't understand. Social engineering is an example of social engineering is when you see an advertisement on a website and it says, download this to speed up your Mac or your PC. You click on that and then you think that you're installing a program to speed up your computer, but in fact, maybe you are, but you're also installing malware. And then that then can do whatever it's capable of doing. So, social engineering is, I mean, please explain that to people. What does that term mean?
Yeah, so basically, I mean, you described a good example. The idea simply is that they take advantage of a trusted relationship. So in that situation, download this antivirus protection. They might even use the name of a company that you recognize and you trust. They take advantage of that trusted relationship. And all of a sudden you do it, and there's something nefarious that you're downloading instead. And that's the social engineering component. That's where they engineer you to think something is trustworthy when it's really not, and all of a sudden now you've infected yourself. It's a very common technique. It's the most common technique utilized by the criminal element because it's so effective, because people keep falling prey to it. And criminals are getting better and better and better. When I first started working crime or preventing crime in the FBI, a lot of the emails that were generated, they're called phishing emails. These were emails that you might have received from a bank, and that bank really wasn't Bank of America, but they tried to social engineer the way, choose that trusted relationship, were poorly written. Those days are done. Emails are well written. They look legitimate. There are things that I potentially will fall prey to. So they've gotten a lot better at this idea of social engineering. But the key component here is creating awareness. So companies need to basically either create their own product or utilize other products out there to help train the workforce. Like I said before, a lot of times people are the greatest vulnerability, but if you have an educated workforce, they potentially can be your biggest asset. But you've got to educate them. You've got to give them the tools for success. And the final thing in my 5-step plan is to basically share intel. Sharing intel is when you start seeing what is termed indicators of compromise. These are things that you can identify to a threat actor once you've identified that happening. Share that with others. There's different means to do that, but you share with other individuals, people, even your competitors, people in your space, to help create more awareness. There's a reciprocity that comes in when you do that. You share with others, they feel like, well, hey, if I see something that could help you, I'll share with you. You can cultivate relationships, and when you do that, you can share the information. So share intel. One key component when I talk about sharing intel is to share intel with law enforcement.
Right.
That's pivotal, because no matter how frustrated we are whenever something happens, we're not, as companies, empowered to do anything about it in terms of actually identifying and apprehending the threat actor. The only individuals who can do that are law enforcement agencies. Well, they need to know. And there's a way to do this. A lot of times companies are hesitant to do it, but there's a way to do it in a very structured and controlled and responsible manner, where you just share the information that allow them to do what they need to do. Law enforcement agencies are not there to basically determine whether or not there's wrongdoing by your part, if there's negligence in play. They don't care about that. All they care about is identifying that threat actor to prevent that threat actor from victimizing other individuals. So those are the 5 things you can do as a company.
Huge. Thank you so much for sharing that. So, folks, please connect with Michael on LinkedIn, Twitter. Michael Anaya. What was your Twitter handle name?
It is MFD ANAYA. So MFD Anaya.
Okay, cool. So I got that. I got that on the screen right here. Hopefully, no typos in that. Looks good to me. Once again, thank you so much for listening, Michael. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it. I feel like I got a lot of insight after this. Actually, in fact, I'm gonna go and listen to this again, and I'm gonna really get those key points down and just really focus on a new mindset, really about security first.
Yeah, well, Ruben, again, I appreciate you taking the time to chat with me. It's a great opportunity to chat with you and help educate your listeners. So thank you.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Michael.
Take care.